Men over 50, top 5 vegetables that boost testosterone and bedroom confidence. Gentlemen, let me ask you a blunt question. When was the last time you felt like the man you used to be? I'm not just talking about energy at work or during a workout. I mean in the bedroom, if your drive has slipped, if your stamina isn't what it once was, or if confidence has quietly faded with age, you are not alone. Here's the shocking truth. By the time most men hit 60, nearly half are already struggling with low testosterone, and the symptoms creep in so slowly you might think it's just getting older. But what if I told you that some of the very foods sitting in your grocery store can help flip the switch back on? Not a pill, not an injection, not some exotic herb. Everyday vegetables that can sharpen your energy, boost your testosterone, and reignite the spark you thought was gone. Now I know some of you are skeptical. You're thinking, come on, doc, vegetables? That's not going to fix my bedroom problems. Fair enough, but stay with me. Because after 40 years treating men just like you, I've seen how simple changes in diet can make a dramatic difference. Not just in lab results, but in real confidence, real strength, and real intimacy. And I'll show you the science to back it up. But before we dive in, I need you to do one quick thing. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with a buddy who could use it. Every click helps us bring you more real, research-backed health tips for men who refuse to fade quietly into old age. So buckle up. Because in the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal the top 5 vegetables that don't just protect your health. They can help restore the man you remember. And trust me, number 1 on this list will surprise you. Understanding testosterone after 50. When most people hear the word testosterone, they think about sex drive. And yes, it plays a huge role in intimacy. But let me tell you, after more than 4 decades in medicine, I've seen firsthand that testosterone is far more than just a bedroom hormone. It is the fuel behind a man's vitality. It influences how much energy you have in the morning, how motivated you feel to take on challenges, how easily you build or lose muscle, how your body stores fat, and even how sharp and steady your mood is throughout the day. In fact, the American Urological Association describes testosterone as a master regulator for male health, affecting virtually every organ system. Now, here's the reality. Testosterone doesn't stay the same forever. By the time a man hits 50, he has already lost an average of 20 to 30% of his youthful testosterone levels. By 60, that loss often climbs to 40 or even 50%. One large-scale study published in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that nearly 1 out of 3 men over 60 meets the criteria for clinically low testosterone. By age 70, that number rises to almost half. But here's something most men don't realize. Low testosterone doesn't just affect your sex drive. It changes how you live day to day. Men with lower levels are more likely to struggle with weight gain, muscle loss, depression, and even memory decline. In fact, research from the Massachusetts Male Aging Study showed that low testosterone is linked to higher risks of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and reduced lifespan. Let me ask you a question. Have you noticed yourself gaining belly fat even though your diet hasn't changed much? Or maybe you feel drained halfway through the day when you used to power through with ease. Do you catch yourself feeling less patient, less confident, or simply less driven than before? These aren't just signs of aging. They can be signals that your testosterone is quietly slipping away. But here's the part I want you to hold on to. This decline is not a life sentence. Yes, testosterone naturally falls with age, but the speed of that decline, the difference between coasting into your 60s with strength or dragging yourself there in fatigue, depends heavily on your choices. Diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management can all shift the balance. For example, a study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism found that obese men were twice as likely to suffer from low testosterone compared to men of a healthy weight. But here's the good news. Men who lost just 10% of their body weight saw their testosterone rise by an average of 15%. That's not a pill. That's not an injection. That's food, movement, and lifestyle. Another study from Harvard University showed that men who exercised at least 3 times per week, particularly resistance training, had significantly higher testosterone than sedentary men of the same age. And interestingly, those who also ate diets rich in vegetables, lean proteins, and healthy fats maintained testosterone levels nearly 20% higher than those who followed a typical processed Western diet. So let me turn the question back to you. What would your life look like if you could restore even 10 or 15% of your testosterone naturally? Would you have the energy to start that hobby you've been putting off? Would you finally lose those stubborn 10 pounds around your waist? Would you feel more confident in your relationships or in yourself? Gentlemen, after treating thousands of patients over the years, I can tell you this: testosterone is not just a number on a lab report. It's the difference between coasting through your later years and thriving in them. And while you can't stop the clock, you absolutely can slow it down. Diet and lifestyle choices are the steering wheel, and the vegetables we'll be talking about shortly. They are some of the most powerful tools you can use to keep your hormones working for you, not against you. Why vegetables matter for male hormones. Most men think of vegetables as nothing more than side dishes, but when it comes to hormone health, they're much more powerful than that. Vegetables are loaded with the exact nutrients your body needs to keep testosterone steady and active. Take magnesium, for example. It's one of the most overlooked minerals in men's health, and yet studies show that men with higher magnesium levels also have significantly higher testosterone. Spinach, kale, and Swiss chard are among the richest natural sources. Zinc is another key player. It's directly involved in the production of testosterone in the testes, and a deficiency can cut levels almost in half. Where can you find it naturally? Vegetables like mushrooms and legumes can help fill the gap. Even vitamin D, which we often think of as coming only from the sun, can be boosted through vegetables rich in compounds that enhance absorption, such as leafy greens. Beyond nutrients, vegetables are some of the best natural anti-inflammatory foods you can eat. Chronic inflammation is one of the silent killers of testosterone because it interferes with the brain's ability to signal the testes to make hormones. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition shows that men with higher inflammatory markers also tend to have lower testosterone. Vegetables like peppers, broccoli, and kale are packed with antioxidants that cool this internal fire, protecting the delicate hormone signaling system. Think of it like keeping the wires of a machine clean so the signal can travel without interference. Another overlooked factor is blood flow. Testosterone is important, yes, but what good is it if it can't travel where it needs to go? Certain vegetables, especially beets and spinach, are rich in natural nitrates. Your body converts those nitrates into nitric oxide, which relaxes and widens blood vessels. That means better circulation to the heart, the muscles, and yes, the areas of your body most affected by low confidence in the bedroom. One study in the Journal of Applied Physiology found that nitrate-rich beet juice improved circulation and stamina in older adults by over 15%. Imagine the impact of better blood flow not just during workouts, but in the moments that matter most in your relationship. And finally, we have cruciferous vegetables, things like broccoli, kale, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts. These vegetables contain compounds such as indole 3-carbinol and DIM that help the body metabolize and flush out excess estrogen. Why does this matter? Because as men age, testosterone doesn't just decline on its own. Some of it is converted into estrogen by an enzyme called aromatase, especially in belly fat. Too much estrogen leaves you tired, overweight, and less motivated. Cruciferous vegetables act like natural regulators, restoring a healthier testosterone to estrogen balance. In fact, research from the University of Michigan has shown that men who regularly eat cruciferous vegetables have higher free testosterone and lower estrogen compared to men who rarely eat them. So let me ask you, how often do vegetables actually make it onto your plate? Not just a slice of tomato on a burger, but real, nutrient-dense servings that could change your hormone health. Could adding a cup of spinach to your breakfast or a serving of broccoli at dinner be the difference between dragging through your day and feeling energized, focused, and confident again? As a doctor who has worked with thousands of men, I can tell you this with confidence. The right vegetables aren't just healthy extras. They are frontline tools in protecting and restoring your masculinity. Every bite is a signal to your body, and the right foods send the message your hormones have been waiting for. Top 5 testosterone-boosting vegetables. Number 5. Spinach, the magnesium powerhouse. Spinach may look like an ordinary leafy green, but it is one of the most powerful allies for a man's hormone health. The reason is magnesium, a mineral that most men over 50 are quietly deficient in. Research published in the Journal of Pharmaceutical and Biomedical Analysis found that men who increased their magnesium intake for just 4 weeks experienced a rise in free testosterone of nearly 24%. That is a remarkable change in such a short period of time. Magnesium works by reducing the binding of testosterone to a protein called SHBG, which means more of your testosterone is free and active, not locked away and unusable. Beyond testosterone itself, spinach improves circulation thanks to its high nitrate content. Your body converts those nitrates into nitric oxide, a natural compound that widens blood vessels and increases oxygen delivery to your muscles and tissues. Better circulation doesn't just help you in the gym or on a morning walk. It also matters in the moments when confidence in the bedroom is at stake. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition confirmed that men with higher nitric oxide levels had better vascular health, improved stamina, and stronger overall performance. Another reason I recommend spinach is its versatility. You don't need complicated recipes to benefit. Adding a handful of fresh leaves to your morning smoothie gives you a powerful nutrient boost without altering the taste. Tossing it into an omelet with a little olive oil turns breakfast into a hormone-friendly meal. Even a quick sauté with garlic makes an easy side dish that supports your body in ways most men overlook. Let me ask you something. When was the last time spinach was a regular part of your diet? Many men I see in my clinic tell me they avoid leafy greens because they don't like the taste or never develop the habit. But I can tell you this. The men who make spinach part of their routine almost always report better energy, less afternoon fatigue, and even more endurance during workouts and intimate moments. One of my patients, a 64-year-old retired teacher, started adding spinach smoothies 3 times a week. Within 2 months, his lab work showed a measurable rise in free testosterone, and he told me his morning walks no longer left him winded. His wife even joked that she noticed the difference before he did. Spinach may not have the glamour of exotic supplements or the marketing of expensive powders, but it delivers results that are real, measurable, and sustainable. So the next time you're at the grocery store, think about this. A simple bag of spinach could be one of the smartest investments you make in your health and masculinity. The question is, are you willing to make it part of your daily routine? Number 4, beets, the circulation booster. Beets are one of the most effective vegetables for improving circulation, and circulation is directly tied to testosterone function and overall male vitality. What makes beets special is their high nitrate content. Once consumed, these nitrates are converted into nitric oxide, a molecule that relaxes and widens blood vessels. The result is stronger, more efficient blood flow throughout the body, delivering oxygen and nutrients to muscles, the brain, and of course, the areas that determine confidence in the bedroom. A well-known study published in the Journal of Applied Physiology found that beetroot juice improved stamina in adults by an impressive 16%, showing just how powerful this vegetable can be for endurance and performance. Beyond stamina, better circulation helps maintain healthier arteries and supports testosterone delivery. Even if your body is producing testosterone, it must travel effectively to tissues to have an impact. Poor blood flow is one of the hidden reasons men feel tired, weak, and less responsive with age. By keeping the vascular system open and flexible, beets help ensure hormones reach where they need to go. Research in the Hypertension Journal also showed that daily beet juice consumption lowered blood pressure in older adults, further protecting the heart while improving overall energy. I think about a patient of mine, Dennis, age 64. He had started to avoid workouts and intimacy because he felt winded after the smallest effort. Instead of prescribing another medication, I encouraged him to add beet juice 3 times a week and roasted beets to his evening meals. Within 2 months, he reported walking longer without breaks, climbing stairs with ease, and his confidence in the bedroom had quietly returned. His wife later told me, "He's smiling more and he hasn't done that in years." Now let me ask you, when you picture beets, do you think of them as medicine or just a side vegetable you might push aside on your plate? Could something as simple as a glass of beet juice or a few slices of roasted beets a few times a week be the difference between dragging yourself through the day and moving with purpose? The science says yes, and I've seen it firsthand. Beets are versatile, too. You can drink them as juice before a workout for an energy boost, roast them with olive oil and herbs for dinner, or grate them raw into salads for a fresh, earthy crunch. However you enjoy them, what matters most is consistency. A steady supply of nitrates keeps your blood vessels working at their best, which means better performance not only in the gym or on a walk, but in the moments that truly matter at home. Number 3, kale, the estrogen balancer. Kale is more than just a trendy green. It plays a unique role in hormone balance for men over 50. What makes kale special is a compound called indole 3-carbinol, which the body converts into DIM or diindolylmethane. DIM helps the body metabolize and flush out excess estrogen. Why is this so important? As men age, not only does testosterone naturally decline, but more of it gets converted into estrogen by an enzyme called aromatase, especially in men carrying extra belly fat. Too much estrogen in men can lead to fatigue, stubborn weight gain, loss of muscle, and lower drive. By helping the body clear out that excess estrogen, kale restores a healthier testosterone to estrogen ratio, giving testosterone the chance to work the way it's meant to. Scientific studies back this up. Research published in the Journal of Nutrition and Cancer found that cruciferous vegetables like kale improved estrogen metabolism, reducing harmful estrogen byproducts that are linked to both low testosterone and higher cancer risk. Another study from the University of Michigan showed that men who consumed more cruciferous vegetables had higher levels of free testosterone compared to men who avoided them. Beyond hormones, kale is rich in antioxidants like lutein and zeaxanthin, which protect the brain and eyes from aging, and it provides vitamin K, essential for bone strength and cardiovascular health. I recall a patient named Michael, age 66, who struggled with weight around his midsection and complained about low energy and a declining sex drive. His labs showed normal total testosterone but a high estrogen to testosterone ratio, which explained his symptoms. I suggested he start adding kale into his meals, smoothies in the morning, a kale salad at lunch, and sautéed kale with olive oil and garlic at dinner a few nights a week. 6 months later, Michael had lost nearly 12 pounds, felt stronger, and told me, "Doc, I didn't realize how much better I could feel until now." His hormone ratio improved, not with medication, but with food. So let me ask you, how often does kale actually find its way into your meals? Do you still think of it as a bitter green reserved for health fanatics? Or can you see it as one of the simplest ways to give your hormones the balance they need? Kale can be enjoyed in so many ways. Tossed into a smoothie with apple or pineapple to soften the taste, baked into crunchy kale chips, or lightly sautéed with garlic for a quick side dish. However you prepare it, the point is to eat it regularly. Consistency is what makes kale such a powerful ally for men who want to stay lean, energized, and balanced well into their later years. Number 2, asparagus, the bedroom ally. Asparagus has been considered an aphrodisiac for centuries, and modern science now explains why. It's rich in vitamin E, a nutrient that improves blood vessel function and boosts the production of sex hormones. It also contains folate, which helps regulate histamine levels in the body, directly influencing sexual arousal. Potassium, another key nutrient in asparagus, supports healthy blood pressure and circulation, making sure blood flows where it needs to go during moments of intimacy. Together, these nutrients create a vegetable that not only fuels overall health, but also directly supports confidence in the bedroom. Scientific evidence backs up these traditional beliefs. Research published in the International Journal of Vitamin and Nutrition Research highlights vitamin E's role in improving reproductive health by enhancing circulation and hormone activity. Folate, often overlooked, plays a critical role in producing neurotransmitters that affect mood and arousal, while potassium ensures a steady cardiovascular system, preventing the dips in energy and performance many men experience as they age. On top of this, asparagus is a natural probiotic, meaning it feeds the healthy bacteria in your gut. A healthy gut improves nutrient absorption, which is essential for keeping testosterone and other hormones balanced. I think of one of my patients, Paul, a 68-year-old widower who had recently started dating again. He admitted to me that his energy and performance weren't what they used to be, and he was nervous about it. Rather than turning to medications right away, we focused on his diet. Paul began adding asparagus to his meals, steamed with a squeeze of lemon, grilled as a side dish, and tossed into stir-fries. Within a few months, he reported feeling more energetic and confident, not only in the gym but also in his personal life. His story reminded me that sometimes the simplest foods can restore not just health but also self-assurance. So let me ask, when was the last time asparagus made it onto your plate? Do you see it as just another vegetable or as a natural ally for your circulation, energy, and intimacy? By enjoying it a few times a week, you're not just eating a side dish, you're giving your body the nutrients it needs to support hormone health, blood flow, and overall vitality. A bundle of asparagus might seem small, but the difference it makes can be felt in every area of your life. Number 1, broccoli, the testosterone protector. Broccoli is one of the most powerful vegetables a man over 50 can add to his diet, not only for general health but also for hormone balance. What makes broccoli unique is a compound called DIM, or diindolylmethane, which is formed when the body digests cruciferous vegetables. DIM helps metabolize and clear out excess estrogen, restoring a healthier testosterone-to-estrogen ratio. For men, that balance is critical because too much estrogen leads to fatigue, stubborn belly fat, lower muscle mass, and reduced drive. By keeping estrogen in check, broccoli allows testosterone to do its job more effectively. But the benefits don't stop there. Broccoli is also high in vitamin C, which helps lower cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. Cortisol and testosterone have an inverse relationship, When stress and cortisol rise, testosterone falls. By reducing cortisol, vitamin C indirectly supports stronger testosterone levels, steadier mood, and better energy. Research in the Journal of Nutrition found that men who consumed more cruciferous vegetables, including broccoli, had higher testosterone levels and a lower risk of prostate cancer compared to those who ate very little. That's an incredible dual benefit, supporting hormone health while also protecting one of the most vulnerable organs in aging men. I remember a patient, Alan, age 63, who came to me with low energy and concern about his family history of prostate cancer. He wasn't keen on aggressive treatments or supplements, so we focused on food. Alan began eating broccoli almost daily, sometimes steamed, sometimes tossed into stir-fries, and occasionally roasted with olive oil and turmeric. After several months, he not only reported better energy and focus, but also lost nearly 10 pounds of belly fat. His follow-up labs showed improved testosterone balance, and his urologist told him his prostate health markers looked stronger than they had in years. He told me, "Doc, I used to hate broccoli, but now I see it as part of my insurance policy for aging. So let me ask, how often does broccoli make it onto your dinner plate? Is it something you eat reluctantly, or could you see it as one of the simplest, most effective tools to protect your hormones and your long-term health? Whether steamed, stir-fried with garlic, or roasted with turmeric for an extra anti-inflammatory punch, broccoli is more than just a vegetable. For men over 50, it's a protector, a hormone balancer, and a quiet but powerful ally in staying strong, energetic, and confident well into the later decades of life. So, gentlemen, let's bring it all together. We've seen how testosterone isn't just about sex. It's about strength, confidence, energy, and the drive to live life fully. And we've learned why vegetables aren't just side dishes, but powerful allies in keeping your hormones balanced, your circulation strong, and your confidence alive. Spinach fuels your body with magnesium to unlock more free testosterone. Beets supercharge circulation and stamina. Kale helps flush out excess estrogen, restoring balance. Asparagus, nature's bedroom ally, supports arousal and gut health. And broccoli, the true protector, keeps testosterone strong while guarding against prostate issues. Individually, they're powerful. Together, they can transform the way you feel, think, and perform. I've seen it happen countless times in my patients, and the science is clear. Food really is medicine. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you started adding even 2 or 3 of these vegetables into your meals this week? Would you wake up with more energy? Would you move through your day with more focus? Would you feel more confident when it matters most? The choice is in your hands. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, share it with a friend who needs to hear this. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our upcoming tips for staying strong, healthy, and confident after 50. Gentlemen, remember, age is just a number. Strength, vitality, and confidence, that's a decision. I'll see you in the next video.